I think they still are. So welcome back. I've got Douglas Carswell here. He is the president and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy.
Good morning, Mary. Good morning, Mississippi.
Yes. How you doing? You doing all right? What's going on?
I love this time of year. Football season started, Friday night lights, my favorite time of year in the greatest state in the union.
Well, it is. And I couldn't see the Ole Miss game Saturday. That kind of burned me out because I'm not going to pay anything more than a fee for cable. If I wanted to pay a couple more bucks, I could have seen it. But what, 76 to nothing?
Even more important than the college football, the local high school football on Friday night.
That's what Lance is involved in that. They're all involved. I mean, gee whiz, that's
I
a
live
big
for
deal.
watching prep on a Friday night.
Really?
I was just about to ask you who your team in the metro area is, and prep is your
Go Prep.
Coach
Prep.
Godwin is awesome. They got a great team.
He's
too.
done such a great job. I think actually the coach of the local high school football team has the toughest job in the whole of the state because every parent thinks they know what to do, but he's doing a great job.
Do you go to the games?
Oh,
of course.
Religiously, absolutely.
How long are you in Mississippi now?
3.5 years. Yeah. Long enough to understand the rules of football now. But don't listen to any advice I give.
You know what an onside kick is, right? Yeah.
I'll get back to you.
Well, I think football is sort of like hockey, where it's best if you see it on TV because then you know where the ball is or you know where the puck is. Because if you're sitting there watching it, I mean, if you're like me, get totally faked out, looking over here and the ball's over there, or looking over here and the puck is over there. Like,
it's not just the game. What I love about it is the whole school, the whole community comes out, and even kids who aren't particularly athletic do something, and it's such a wonderful display of pride in a school. It's just.
Oh, yeah.
I love it.
Well, one time years ago, I was doing the helicopter traffic. It was getting late in the season, and we were over the spillway, and here comes this entourage, these big buses and police, all this kind of stuff, and it was Madison Central coming to play Northwest Rankin. I was like, you think it was Notre Dame or something like that? Like, whoa, look how cool that is.
But I'd rather watch one of them play than an NFL game if I'm honest.
Let me ask you a question, Mr. Carswell. In being a Brit, what is it when you come here into the United States and you see American hockey where they'll take the time out and get into the bare knuckle brawl, and then they're done, and then it's like nothing happened. They get right back to the game. Can you imagine putting that in like soccer or baseball?
Soccer, the fighting tends to take place off the pitch amongst the supporters in England. Whereas
hockey games are great because you can watch the fights. You can watch the audience. Oh my God, the fans of the hockey game are just out of control, crazy. And you can watch the skating because those guys know how to skate. Man, I'm telling you, because I'm a skater, anyway, until I broke myself up. But then you can watch the game. So they have a lot of things to keep on your mind. But anyway, but we don't have hockey. Well, we used to. We had. I think there might be somebody down on the Gulf Coast. Are they still
around? Ole Miss
around?
has a club team, and there are some minor league teams. I've been to the minor league games. Are crazy.
There was talk years ago that there was a team at MC or gonna be, and that they were all going to come around. And so we lost our skating rink, and we were thinking, oh gosh, maybe we'll get a skating rink back if these schools want to play hockey. But nothing ever happened. Anyway, so what we're here to talk about, speaking of colleges, our dear friend DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And Mr. Carswell thinks that not such a good idea, and so did our auditor, Shad White. And some companies are even getting rid of it. You know that.
Well, there's been some great news on the face of it. University of Mississippi just announced a couple of weeks ago they were going to get rid of their diversity department. But actually, I'm a bit skeptical. I think this is an attempt to deflect from real change. They know that DEI is just no longer morally defensible, so they're pretending they're not doing it. They're rebranding it.
And it has a new name. It's called, what is it now? It's the, let's see, what is it? The Office of what is it? I wrote Division of Diversity, that's it. Division of Access, Opportunity, and Community Engagement.
But the same people are going to be running it on the same salaries. And I suspect that actually, if you look at the granular detail, for example, the Department of English at the university currently says that, they recognize that legacies of systemic injustice within institutions and their academic field, they talk about how inclusion, diversity, and equity is central to the scholarly mission. I suspect that's all going to continue.
Like, how is it the? And, I have said this before, and I cannot go into details because I don't have enough sources to do this, but there is a hospital in this area that requires its doctors to learn pronouns. For gosh sake. So my example was, so let's say I'm a patient. I go to the hospital to get my tonsils out, and I'm lying there on the table, and they say, "Is she ready?" And I jump up and say, "No, you can't do that. You use the wrong pronoun. I'm not a she. I'm a him or his or whatever they think I mean, honestly, why? And that's all part of the whole thing.
But I think what's happened at the University of Mississippi is really quite significant. I mean, just by way of background with your listeners, there has been an attempt for the past 2 or 3 years to pass anti-DEI legislation in Mississippi, similar to the laws passed in other states. And this would make it illegal for diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is basically racially discriminatory practices, to be pushed in universities using public money.
Yes.
Now, the interesting thing is that the Senate leadership in Mississippi has been very I would say, underhand at killing off this anti-DEI legislation. But what I think is now significant is the Senate leadership, the weak Senate leadership in Mississippi, is no longer going to be able to hold the line on this for much longer. And so I think what's happened is a deal has been done between the people who run the universities and some of the lawmakers to pretend to get rid of DEI, to try and head off the growing pressure for anti-DEI legislation. So I think this tells us about the weakness of the Senate leadership. It also tells us that there's an attempt to preserve the DEI. I mean, DEI is a shakedown. Lots of big salaries are paid to lots of people.
Yeah, although the woman who runs it gets almost $247,000 a year.
There are big vested interests on campus who want to keep this shakedown going. I think this is an attempt to try and preserve that, but I think it shows actually that the anti-DEI people within the state legislature are a lot weaker than they've ever been.
Well, I was surprised because, folks, this is in a column. I happened to have seen the column online, and I didn't realize that it was yours till I got to the bottom of it. Oh, well, no wonder. It's so articulate and well-spoken and all this kind of stuff. Then it's been in one of the local weekly newspapers, too, about this, if you want to read more about it. But I was surprised when you're talking about Mississippi's weak Senate leadership. I was surprised to hear you say that. I mean, I thought that you were, gung-ho legislature and all. I guess I haven't listened to you enough or read enough. But
you shouldn't be, because the story of the Senate leadership is that it's repeatedly killed off conservative proposals, not just anti-DEI legislation. It also has killed off 3 years in a row an attempt to restore the ballot initiative in our state. It was also opposed to the school funding reform bill that went through. Now, the House came up with this marvelous new system to actually fund students rather than a system. The Senate leadership was vociferously against that. They were forced to compromise, again, telling you something about perhaps their weakening position. But again and again and again, we see leadership in the Senate that is blocking conservative policy. And I think this is starting to be noticed.
Yes. Well, certainly this is news to me. Years ago, I did cover the legislature, but it was like a long time ago. And I don't pay as close attention to it as I should. I know who some of the principals are, but I remember this goes way back in Mississippi history when Ray Mabus was running to be reelected as governor, back whenever that was, late 80s, early 90s. He wanted to have a second Education Reform Act. And he was involved in the first one, which kindergarten. I mean, that was a big deal. Okay, so for the second one, I don't know what the principles were going to be, what the points were going to be, but he had this big dog and pony show and media and all. Cal was part of the Capitol Press, and we went there, and he's talking all this stuff. And he was going to pay for it by funds from a state lottery. And this was back, speaking of the Senate, and I said, but I raised my hand. And I'm sure he could have killed me, but I was a legitimate question. I said, what are you going to do? What is your plan B? Because everybody knows the Senate will not vote for a state lottery. And it was like, shut up, Mary. He didn't say that, but I could just feel, it. Coming from that part of the room. But, I mean, that was the truth about it back then. Of course, now, time went by and Alice Clark worked her magic and we have lottery and all this kind of stuff now. But, so I haven't kept up with them. I don't think a lottery is particularly conservative, but it was, there were reasons why they couldn't do it, religious reasons why it wasn't feasible. But they did do that. But anyhow. Oh, and by the way, it was a senator. He's passed away now. Senator Deering from Natchez was the father of casinos. By the way, did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Yes, he was. He didn't like to be called that. But anyway, but so that's interesting about that. But if you're just calling it something else, it's still DEI.
Of course, it's still DEI. And also,
who are you fooling here?
Mississippi has had a notional conservative statewide majority for 12 years. why 12 years into a supposed conservative notional majority is nothing being done to stop woke ideology being foisted on young Mississippi minds at public expense. They've tackled this in other states. Why is there so little action here in Mississippi? I think we need to start to identify, why is it that the bill was killed in the Senate? Who killed it? Who, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, was happy for it to die in committee? We need to call this out. We need to allow the public to see who is preventing them from getting the conservative policies that they continually vote for.
Who do you think?
Well, I think I'm not going to name names. It's not my job to name names. I think it is weak Senate leadership.
Yeah,
interestingly, in other states, the governors have taken the lead on this. And I'm quite surprised that we haven't seen an executive order like they've had in Florida or Oklahoma.
Yes.
That would go some way towards tackling this. I think maybe in a state like Mississippi, there's perhaps a coziness between some state officials and people on the IHL and administrators who run universities. And I think what we need to do is let a bit of sunlight in as a disinfectant and say, what has been said, what reassurances have been given on DEI? Why is it that we're not seeing an executive order in Mississippi? Why are we not seeing the legislation that the House overwhelmingly supports being passed by the Senate? Who's preventing this from happening? And what are the deals that have been done?
We are at 888-808-8637, I should tell you all. And we take comments at 601-879-4395, 601-879-4395. And we are live streaming supertalk.fm/Mary. I wonder if it's not the legacy of Ole Miss, the old days, Ole Miss, all that kind of stuff, and going back to integration and everything, and it was such a conservative and anti-black and all this kind of stuff school. And then over the years, it's trying to prove and has built a whole nother image. Now it thinks it's the University of Michigan or something like that, where you have all this kind of stuff. Do you think?
The way to end discrimination is to stop discriminating. It's precisely because of the unhappy, sad, tragic history of racial discrimination in Mississippi that we need to stop discriminating against people on the basis of race. We need to stop teaching a narrative that is divisive on racial lines and teach a narrative that shows that the United States is a country where all individuals are treated equally.
Yep.
This is the foundational promise of this republic. We need universities founded and teaching that rather than trying to discriminate on the basis of past discrimination. That's absurd.
I know. But we'll be back in just a couple of minutes. This is Douglas Carswell. He'll be with us for one more segment. The time is flying. Stay with us. So anyway, we've been talking about DEI, diversity, equity, not equality now. There's a whole different meaning between equity and equality and inclusiveness, and this being wiped out by Ole Miss, but not necessarily so. So what's the difference? It's a horse with another name, but it's still a horse. What they're changing it to. So who's getting fooled here? Who's not going to, how can you do this and think that people aren't going to go, it's the same thing?
Well, I think this is an attempt, and they're presumably advised to do this by well-paid lobbyists, that, make this cosmetic change, and then, perhaps during a ball game you can sit down with some lawmakers and statewide officials and you can say, look, nothing to worry about. We used to do that. We used to have DEI, but we don't anymore. And it's the oldest trick in politics. When an official doesn't want to change something, they pretend they've already got rid of the thing that you find objectionable.
And the follow-up question is, well, then what's the difference?
Yeah.
How different are your policies and your practices and your edicts or whatever? What's the difference?
I think the really simple test in this is if Chancellor Glenn Boyce was serious about getting rid of DEI, has he made it clear he will be running the university on the basis of equality, not equity? Now, there's an important difference. Mm-hmm. Equality means giving everybody the same opportunity because they're an individual, irrespective of anything else. Equity means making sure that people have similar outcomes and therefore weighting the system and rigging it to favour so-called disadvantaged groups at the expense of others. They're two profoundly different things. Equality is good. It's one of the foundational principles of America. Equity is what you do in a socialist country to discriminate against a group of people that you regard as oppressors. Now, I don't really think most Mississippi taxpayers want their universities run on the basis of equity. So I think if Chancellor Boyce is serious about getting rid of DEI, he needs to make unequivocal statement that there will no longer be any reference to equity in any of the departments, and all the university departments, including the coursework, will stop preaching the creed of equity.
Well, what about the other universities? And let's start off with Mississippi State. Do they have it? Does everybody have it?
I think they do. I mean, I think it's less obvious at Mississippi State. Now, curiously, Shad White was attacked by the head of communications, Sid Slater, for suggesting that there was DEI at State. I'm not sure that it was a wise move from a communications director, because now the spotlight is very much on Mississippi State. It's starting to get some national attention. Now, clearly there is some DEI at State. I think it's very unwise to try and pretend that there's no DEI when the university's own websites show that there is DEI. But I think it's less prevalent at State, but it still exists.
Yeah, the focus was always on Ole Miss. Well, back in the day, I think the focus stayed
the wokest public university in the state.
Yes, and the focus stayed on Ole Miss over all the various years. So, if we go on their websites, we can look this up. What about like Jackson State, who's here, right here in town? What about them? Do they have it?
I've not looked into it, but I'm sure. I wouldn't put it this way. I haven't looked, but I wouldn't be surprised to find it, simply because this woke mind virus has infiltrated public education so far and wide. I wouldn't be surprised to find it in every public university. It has infiltrated businesses as well. Absolutely.
I mean, my gosh. There was a story that I read, found 2-3 years ago. I think I found on Breitbart, and it was about the Kroger Corporation and how they were going to institute this they were going to put out, it was a guidelines for they didn't call them associates, there's some other word they use for their people, and their employees were supposed to learn things like, you don't say, hello ma'am, how are you? You say just, hello, how are you? You don't say, how's your husband? You say, how is your mate, or how is your spouse, or the person you live with, things like this. But it was going to be all, and they were supposed to embrace the LGBT flag and Pride Week and all this kind of stuff.
I think part of the problem is about 30 years ago, when the woke mind virus started to get going in American universities, many people like me just lazily assumed once kids leave college, go out into the real world will kick in and they'll leave that nonsense behind on campus. How wrong we were. Instead, what happened is they took those woke ideas with them into the HR departments of corporate America, into the boardrooms of corporate America, into government departments, into the US military. And it's time, I think, for people who don't want their country to be run on the basis of DEI to take a stand. And I think we should take a stand in Mississippi by saying, you are not going to use public money, public tax dollars to promote this ideology at Mississippi State.
And you don't want to go to the grocery store and have this stuff put on you either. They never did do it, because I was talking with some people here at one of the local stores here, and they've never heard of it, and they've delayed it. As I understand, they've gotten involved in other things. But I mean, that just made me ill. We don't need that. If, of course, this gets into national politics, because that's where it comes from, right? If Trump is elected, it'll be done. I mean, it'll be gone, meaning done, finished. He's not a DEI guy, let's put it that way. And he's horrified at what's happened at the military. As a military brat, I'm horrified at what happened. I think it was General Milley was quoted as saying a few months ago, well, I'm just really anxious to learn about my white supremacy. Like, what? This is the military.
Well, I can't really speak to that. I mean,
I know. Yeah.
What happens at a federal level is beyond my pay grade. What I'm interested in is Mississippi. We can do something to stop this nonsense in Mississippi. And it's extraordinary that notional conservatives in office should be killing off anti-DEI bills and presumably colluding with university bureaucrats to claim that they're taking action against DEI when they're not.
What can the person who's listening to this saying, okay, well, I don't want that for my kids, or okay, I don't want that on a Ole Miss campus, what can I do? What can people do?
Ask your lawmaker, what did they do to support the anti-DEI legislation, and were they involved in trying to kill that anti-DEI legislation, and will they commit to voting for anti-DEI legislation in the next session?
You've got to push it.
Nothing moves in politics unless you push it.
Exactly.
And you might hurt the feelings of some here today, gone tomorrow politicians, but the future values of the next generation of young Mississippians is way more important than the feelings and the precious feelings of Mississippi politics.
And you can't be mollified by somebody saying, well, I'll put in a bill for that. I'll just put my bill right in there. No, putting your bill in there means nothing. What happens is what happens to that bill. Yeah. Who gets their hands on these bills and decides?
They've got it down to a T. They've got this mechanism for killing things in committee as though somehow, like the weather, it's some random
committee.
It's nudge, nudge, wink, wink. There's a deal done between the Senate leadership and committee chairman to make sure these things don't come out of committee. And that's what we need to expose. If people saw that, they wouldn't put up with it. Our job as a think tank is to make sure people can see that this is what is going on. This is why people vote Conservative but end up without Conservative policies that all the neighbouring states around us are now getting. And it's not just on anti-DEI. It's on school choice. It's on tax cuts. It's on deregulation. It's on a whole bunch of things that people in Mississippi aren't getting because of this constant killing things off on the sly.
Well, if it even gets to committee, this is another thing. It could just go from the hopper into somebody's pocket, shall we say. A leader's pocket. I'm not giving that to committee. Nope, not going to do that. So you got to watch that.
Being a Conservative leader is about more than hunting ducks and taking pictures of yourself hunting ducks. It's about actually delivering Conservative policies on things like stopping DEI, giving people school choice, and cutting taxes.
What do you think they're afraid of?
I think there's just basically been, until very recently, a lack of accountability. It's possible, I think, to pretend that because you shoot ducks and post pictures of yourself shooting ducks, that you're somehow automatically assumed to be a Conservative. But I think we now need organizations like SuperTalk, Mississippi Center for Public Policy, need to call out and say, what is it you've actually done to achieve school choice, anti-DEI legislation?
And how many of these people are running for governor? We got a lame duck governor. That's coming up in a couple of years more. We got to run for governor. Here's what I did.
Well, I run a 501c3 organization. We don't get involved in supporting candidates.
Right.
We stand for principles. We don't attack people.
I got you. But the point being, some of these people that are not doing what you feel that they ought to be doing are going to act certain ways because they might be thinking about running for governor. So that's the motivation.
If Mississippi politics can be a competition to see who can do the best job of delivering anti-DEI legislation, school choice, and tax cuts, fantastic.
But
that would be awesome.
So many of them are afraid of, if I do that, I'll be accused of being whatever. A misogynist, or I'll be
being a Reaganite conservative. I just went to watch Reagan, that movie, and I thought to myself,
was it?
Well, the extraordinary thing is how one man changed the future of the world for the better. And he started out as a state governor. He was a state governor with principle, and a state governor who believed in something, and a state governor who wasn't afraid to do difficult decisions and take on parasitic vested interests. That is what Conservative leadership at a state level should look like.
Well, so then we got things. When is our next election? Let's see. We had this last election was in 22. Was it in 22? But they're going to get ready. So that's how watch how things move.
We're still fairly into the electoral cycle.
But just watch how things move in the legislature and see if you can figure out. That one's running for governor, or not running for governor. Something like that would be that'd be your job.
If you want to call yourself a conservative, support anti-DEI legislation, tax cuts, and universal school choice. If you don't support those things, doesn't matter how much hunting you do, you're not a conservative.
Well said, Douglas Carswell. Thank you an awful lot for being here today. All right, everybody, thank you for being out there, and we'll see you next time.